Well, the United States is meant to be Israel's closest and most solid ally, but it's being a fair weather friend under Joe Biden. Biden has, in the past couple of days, claimed that Benjamin Netanyahu would cross a red line if he went into Rafah with a ground invasion.
He must pay more attention to the innocent lives being lost as a consequence of the actions taken. He's hurting, in my view, he's hurting Israel more than helping Israel by making the rest of the world, it's contrary to what Israel stands for. And I think it's a big mistake. So I want to see a ceasefire.
Netanyahu overnight rejected these comments, and he said the red line was the October 7 terror attacks.
I don't know exactly what the president meant, but if he meant by that I'm pursuing private policies against the majority, the wish of the majority of Israelis, and that this is hurting the interests of Israel, then he's wrong on both counts.
Now, this public commentary, this public criticism is very rare, and it is concerning. As journalist Cameron Stewart points out, though, in the Australian today, Joe Biden's stance is also likely very political. He writes that Biden's growing frustration with Netanyahu reflects changing domestic opinion in the US in an election year, where polls show that around half of US voters believe Israel has gone too far in its military attacks on Gaza. And around 2/3 of Democrat voters are now critical of Israel's conduct in the war, although around 2/3 of Americans also support Israel's right to destroy Hamas. Now, Foreign Minister here in Australia, Penny Wong, today joined the fray, saying that while the world was sympathetic after October 7, now, she says, Israel is losing support and will continue to do so unless it changes course. Well, let's bring in now Liberal Senator and former Ambassador to Israel, David Sharma. Dave, thanks so much for your time this evening. Look, why aren't Biden and Penny Wong making demands of Hamas instead of Israel? We always hear this constant lecturing of Israel. And it seems that Israel is becoming increasingly isolated in its battle to defeat Hamas, and that it would probably win more friends internationally if it just laid down arms and let Hamas continue to commit terror attacks against its people.
It's a very good question, Sharri. I mean, this conflict would be over within a matter of hours if Hamas released the remaining hostages and agreed to surrender or lay down its weapons at the very least. And I think too often we're hearing in public messaging, including from the Australian side, all the focus on Israel's conduct of this war and Israel's actions, and none about the party that started this war with this horrific terrorist attack and that continues to be responsible for its continuation, and that's Hamas. Now, that you need two parties to secure a ceasefire, and Hamas doesn't seem to be interested in a ceasefire. They seem to be interested in something they can sell as a victory, which leaves them in place, which gives them a propaganda coup, which strengthens the arm of Iran and other actors like that in the region, and which leaves Israel in a terribly weakened state.
It's very interesting, isn't it, how Hamas always knows the exact number of Palestinians who've been killed just moments after a supposed bomb, but it still can't tell us what has happened to the 130 hostages who were taken on October 7, whether they're dead or alive, and where are they. Qatar, meanwhile, also big. This is actually really big news. Qatar has threatened to deport Hamas's billionaire leadership chiefs, so they've been providing safe harbour to the Hamas leaders. Of course, the Hamas leaders don't actually reside in Gaza. If they don't agree to a hostage truce deal, do you think this pressure from the likes of Qatar will be effective?
I think it has the potential to be effective, and it's good to see some of the Arab states and neighbours of Israel getting involved in the diplomacy here. I mean, Qatar has a lot of influence with Hamas because they host its political leadership, as you point out. They've bankrolled it over a number of years. Ultimately, they have an ability to call the shots here. And I think what we see from this media report is that countries like Egypt, countries like Qatar, countries like Jordan are growing increasingly frustrated with Hamas's continuation of this conflict, which is causing tremendous suffering amongst the Palestinian civilian population, it has to be said. And Hamas does not seem to be interested in any sort of end to these hostilities. And I think we need countries like Qatar, countries like Egypt to do more to bring this war to an end, because countries like the United States have influence over Israel, and we've seen that being exercised over the last few days. But we need countries with influence over Hamas to really bring this conflict to an end.
Mm-mm. Now, we are starting to see media reports, it looks like, and even Matt Thistlethwaite came out today to say that funding should be restarting to UNRWA shortly. The Australian government wants to restart funding to UNRWA. This is the UN organisation where employees actually took part in the October 7 terror attacks. What's your view on this?
I'm fundamentally opposed to it, Sharri. I mean, I think, first of all, the UN's own Office of Internal Investigation into this has not concluded or made any findings. UNRWA clearly recognises that its employees were complicit in the attack because it dismissed 9 of them peremptorily within hours of receiving these Israeli information. And I don't see any way that you can guarantee, given that Gaza is a war zone, that Hamas will not commandeer any assistance that's provided to UNRWA. So, by all means, we should be providing more humanitarian assistance, but we should be channeling it through operations like this US naval-based convoy that will be operating out of Cyprus and establishing a pier off Gaza, and going through organisations that basically aren't embedded in Gaza's civilian infrastructure, like the World Food Programme, like UNICEF, like the Red Cross. UNRWA doesn't just need this investigation to conclude. They need a complete overhaul before we could ever trust them with public dollars again. And this speed with which this is being pushed, I mean, this is the Greens agenda driving Labor here, Sharri. The Greens were opposed to the cut in funding to UNRWA, and the Greens have been vocal about it ever since. And Labor is just looking at the inner city seats it holds with high proportions of Greens voters and saying they want to neutralise this. It's domestic politics.
Labor under Albanese has completely lost its morality. David Sharma, thank you very much for joining me.